The Fearless Podcast, in a time of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. All right, y'all. Welcome back to the Fearless Podcast. We are at episode 66, and it has been a busy couple weeks. And we had a family emergency last week, but all is well and excited to get back online. And today I'm extra excited because I have an awesome guest that I want to discuss some topics that we've been discussing lately. And I want to welcome David Knight to the podcast. Welcome, David. How are you doing, sir?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. Doing pretty good.
Yeah. So for those of you that aren't familiar with David's work, I've been following David for quite a while. And the reason I resonate so well with him is he's very consistent. He has a Christian worldview. And in this right-left paradigm that we're going to be talking about, an Orthodox Christian worldview that is consistent is relatively non-existent. And the way that this cult of politics and groupthink has been created by the social engineers, it's really, well, it's disorienting. And I think it's critical to this postmodern, post-truth world to create this division, but then also detach people from their core logic, ration, and reason, as well as kind of rewrite Christian history. And that's how they're able to like chop us all up. So I wanted to have you on. In the last couple of weeks, there's been some different things that went down that were very curious to me. I'm sure, David, you're familiar with Kyle Rittenhouse and what happened when he tweeted about Ron Paul and all that stuff. So there was this like MAGA backlash. And then interestingly enough, I think it was my weeks have ran together a little bit, but I think it was last week, Joe Rogan came out and kind of alluded to the fact that he preferred RFK Jr. over everyone that somehow magically gets on the ballot. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about ballot access too. But Joe Rogan made a comment about who he may or may not support, and then MAGA lashed back out at him. And so I was really surprised at the Kyle Rittenhouse thing. And they like attacked him so ferociously, like they got him to flip it within 24 hours.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And this cultic mindset is really what has disintegrated any type of discussion on the conservative side. Conservatism, to me, it's been dead probably since Abraham Lincoln, but
That's right.
in a dialogue, in a real way, there's no such thing as conservatism. They're not conserving anything at all. There were these fiscal conservatives, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I'm still waiting to see a fiscal conservative, somebody that's going to fiscally conserve something. But we're watching this entire right side of the paradigm disintegrate as the Overton window is pushed left. And I think you said it maybe a couple days ago you said something about like the liberals are fascist and the Republicans are Democrats or something like that.
Yeah, I said the liberals have become Marxists. The Democrats of my youth, are now Republicans, and the Democrats have become full-on Marxist and proud of it. When you look at Tim Walz, I mean, he loves Mao. I mean, he's the Manchurian candidate. Everybody thinks he's the friendly uncle, but it really is true. When you look at the withering criticism that you get, and I'm sure that you get it as well. Tomorrow is going to be the 7th anniversary of our show. And when I started opposing the things that Trump did in 2020 with the lockdown and the masks and the things like that, and he did it because he paid for it. He was telling people to do it. They're putting out the guidance. He gave Fauci the podium. He gave governors the money. The buck stops with the president. And in Trump's case, it started with him because he was financing all this stuff. That's what his emergency order was about. It was about releasing the money. We'd already had an emergency declaration by the big pharma executive that he put in charge of HHS after they made millions of dollars worth of donations to him after he brought in RFK Jr. to scare them. And Alex Azar, former CEO of Eli Lilly, had declared an emergency the end of January. Now, there wasn't any pandemic anywhere. There wasn't any epidemic anywhere. There wasn't an epidemic in China at that point in time. But he made that declaration, and then Trump, on the Friday the 13th, he released the money just like you would if you declared emergency after a hurricane comes through. And so this is all a plan. It goes back to 2 months before 9/11. You had dark winter simulation where they said, well, what if we have some kind of a pandemic? It could be a bioweapon or it could be something natural. We have to lock everybody down. We have to authorize an emergency vaccine. And so they did that 2 months before 9/11, 1 week after 9/11, anthrax attack. 2 months later, the model legislation sent out to all the different states, Model Health Emergency Power or State Power Act. I forget the order of the words, but it was model legislation to tell everybody, put this in your state code. And they all did within about a year. So that when this happens, you will run this, because they don't want to run into any problems with the 10th Amendment. And so they give the money to the states, and they've already given themselves the power to do all of these things. And then a couple of years after that, in 2005, you had George W. Bush push through the PrEP Act with the insistence of Fauci again. That took another step from the 1986 childhood vaccine legal immunity that Fauci had pushed through with Reagan. And the PrEP Act essentially made sure that nobody's going to get any compensation for being injured if they declared it to be some kind of a pandemic emergency. So, yeah, this has been going on for a long time, but pushing back against Trump and pushing back against the lies that push the stop the steal stuff. And I mean, I'm not talking about vote count competition. I'm talking about 2 days after the election. And there where I was at InfoWars, you had Steve Pachinik, a guy who was a vassal of Henry Kissinger and who had run all kinds of scams and psyops, came on with Owen Schroyer and said, this is all a sting. 2 days after the election, he said, it's all a sting. We put out blockchain watermarks, and we know all the people who have rigged the ballots, and we've got 20,000 National Guard out there arresting people. It's like, that isn't happening. Nobody's reported any of that stuff. Blockchain watermarks, that's not possible. The ballots don't come from the federal government. Each state does its own ballot. All of it was pure lies. And yet that got big coverage, got 4 million views. You had Clarence Thomas's wife sent that to Mark Meadows, the chief of staff of Trump, and said, I hope this is true. Well, it wasn't possible that any of that could be true. And so when I started pushing back against it, not only did I ultimately get fired, but I had a tremendous backlash from all these people who wanted to believe that it was true. And they were still doing that after Biden was sworn in. They still believed it was true. And they were coming after me, like me telling them that this wasn't possible was why Trump had lost or whatever. So I understand what Kyle Rittenhouse went through. It was sad to see that you can't talk about principle. That was the thing I was talking about Trump even before 2020 in 2019, when he started doing the gun control legislation. And he said, I'm going to do gun control by executive order with a bump stock. And I said, well, okay, that's a precedent. We've never seen that before. And I said, and of course, the Democrats are going to jump on that. And Lala Harris was running for president at the time. And she said, when I become president, I'll give Congress 100 days to enact my gun control agenda. If they don't do it, I'll do it by executive order. She's going to do everything by executive order. And she probably will try to do it. We've seen that attempted by Biden as well with a pistol brace. And by the way, Trump put in a pistol brace ban as well and left it there until he was contesting the election. And in December of 2019, he removed it. And because you had the NRA pushing back against that. The NRA did not push back against the bump stock ban, but the NRA pushed back against the pistol brace. So he took it off in December of 2020, and then immediately Biden put it back on when he became president. So I understand what Kyle was going through. It truly is a cult. It's a cult of people who want to shape the reality by what they want to have happen. And it's people who have never been involved in politics before. They don't understand or want to know how anything works. They just want their way. It's a very dangerous thing.
And the scariest part is when you point out these facts, and that's why I tell people, like, on a federal level, elections and all that stuff, I'm kind of super black pilled, because it truly is a monolithic structure
It is.
where both sides do it. The right flavor is slightly more digestible, currently digestible, until it fully manifests itself. And and it's real funny, because just like when you talk to people and you're saying, hey, remember Trump said he was going to lock up Hillary?
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure it might have been this week, or just at the end of last week, he started to allude to that again, I guess because she brought it up at the DNC, maybe, as retaliatory. But
Yeah.
you just point out these basic, general, irrefutable facts that exist. I have a really good friend, his name is Billy Bond, and he calls it the United States of amnesia, because there's so much disinformation constantly swirling that people literally forget the past. They forget what happened to us. They forget who locked us down. They
That's right.
forget who spent all the money. They forget who bailed out the archdiocese and said, and he says, hey, I got you all this money, so I need your vote.
Mhm.
And it all I want to do is have the discussion. Like, everybody talks about, we need to hold people accountable, right? So the
Mhm.
whole entire concept of holding people accountable is like, hey, remember when you said this, but you did this? So, how do you reconcile that? How are you going to explain that to your supposed constituency? You said you were going to lock up Hillary. You said you were going to do all this stuff, and now you're running again. And you're saying, hey, remember when America was great before, when I was running everything? Well, that wasn't America wasn't very great that long before we all got locked down and all the businesses got closed, and we
Yeah.
had all these.
Unprecedented. Unprecedented.
Yeah.
And, I don't know if I saw it on Twitter, happened to see it on Twitter, or if somebody sent it to me, but it was a clip from a show that had Luke Radowski asking a question. Tim Pool was there and Laura Loomer. I don't have time to watch other shows, but somebody sent it to me. And so Luke Radowski says, can't Trump just apologize and say that he got it wrong in 2020? What would be the problem with that? And Tim Pool just loses it. Said, I am so tired of hearing that. That was so 4 years ago. And it's, wait a minute. You and Laura Loomer, all you do is talk about 4 years ago and the election 4 years ago, but you want to completely forget and memory hole what Trump did 4 years ago with all of that stuff. And so, and she jumps in on it and she says, these people that got the vaccine, that's on them. I knew better than to take that vaccine. It's like, really?
Wow.
That's your approach to that? It's just disgusting. Laura Loomer is probably the best example of the Trump cult, people like that. And it truly is frustrating and disgusting to see people who don't know, who don't care, or who want to cover up what the real issues are. The issues matter. The principles matter. This has become like a high school popularity contest for student council. There's nothing other than people and their personalities involved. And you can see that in the rhetoric that Trump has. He could easily make this, he could easily win on the issues, but he's making it about personal insults and about personal competition. I'm prettier than she is. They put her on the cover of Time magazine. It's all about his ego. It's all about narcissism. But the key thing, when we talk about how our society has drifted. Today, I opened the show because Phil Donahue died yesterday, and it was somebody that I watched when I was in high school, and I used to like to watch him because he was an intelligent liberal. He was an old school liberal, and I used to like to think about how I would counter the arguments that he had because I disagreed with him on the issues. But he would have open discussions with people that he disagreed with. And I thought that was interesting to watch. He was one of these liberals that has misplaced compassion. He was one of these liberals, though, that was anti war, and they kicked him off of TV because he opposed the Iraq War. And but he interviewed people like Milton Friedman, who he disagreed with. He interviewed Ayn Rand, who he disagreed with. And I thought that that was an interesting interview because although I have in the past worked with the Libertarian Party, I was never on board with objectivism or Ayn Rand's view of society and that type of thing. And he had her on, and he immediately went to her embrace of selfishness. He actually put together a book that was a collection of her essays called The Virtue of Selfishness. And he said, so you could just say, well, okay, well, I understand that people shouldn't be compelled to do charity, which is, really what socialism is doing, right? It's practicing charity with other people's money. But he says, I understand that, but why attack people because they want to help others? And she said, well, if you say that helping other people is a virtue and altruism is a virtue, and it's like, that's antithetical to everything that we as Christians understand. Right?
Yeah,
That's antithetical to Jesus.
exactly.
She called Jesus immoral, who said, our position here is to serve others. He set the example of that. And I said today, look at what has happened to our society. We've lost the Phil Donahues, the people who were free speech, anti-war liberals. They're gone. They're now replaced with Marxist totalitarians. We now have everyone embracing this love of self, because we know in the last days people will be lovers of self. Boy, if that isn't true now. And we have added to all the greed and selfishness that she sold to people as a virtue. To that, we've added sexual indulgence and debauchery. And look at our society as we have thrown away these Christian values. That's really how we got here. These things matter. They matter more than a political party. They matter more than winning. Sometimes you take the high ground, even if you're going to lose. You've got to do that sometimes because maybe at some point you'll win some converts. Maybe that'll be a regrouping point. Maybe people will look back and say, that was right. We should have taken that other path. Maybe they'll retrace. But you always have to take the moral high ground, and we have to understand that politics is downstream from culture. Culture is downstream from our relationship with God,
Yep.
and that's where we have to fight this thing.
That's why I find your information so critical, because it's consistent. It's a true Christian worldview that's not clouded or rewritten. There's this whole Christian nationalist movement, and you have pastors and all of the, and they're looking to Constantine. Their whole desire is for a church state, which
Yeah.
is completely antithetical to the founders and the Baptists in history that were even persecuted here in America, before the Bill of Rights and all these different things. And, we know from history that, what a church state will do and what it has done throughout history. And yet there's this resurgence or this rebranding, or maybe it's just a straight up psyop. And you have these pastors, pontificating about Christian nationalism, and like, this has ended in disaster previously. This will end in disaster. It's really good at being hyperbolic and dividing people, and it's very good at controlling people, and it can't work. And it was, the lively experiment, the American experiment, was grossly opposed to that. That was
Yeah.
the complete opposite notion of separation of church and state. And now we're watching the RNC and the Republican platform. Like you were saying, Trump could destroy the Democrats on the issues like abortion. But now the Republicans have completely softened, almost, in my opinion, dissolved their position on abortion. They're definitely not
They don't
and
want to defend it at all. Like I said, you used to have politicians who would kiss babies. They won't even kiss the baby, right?
yeah.
They won't talk about mom and apple pie. They don't support motherhood. And they run away from this issue. And if you run away from a battle, guess what? You're going to get shot in the back. And they're
Yep.
getting shot in the back, and they deserve to get shot in the back. If you can't defend the defense of innocent life, You don't have any right being in a position of power. You are a coward. And that's what the GOP is. It's not just Trump. It's the GOP in general.
Yep.
They're running from this as much as they can. Look, I said many times, and I've talked about the what they could do, and we actually had one of the defendants in Washington D.C. that discovered a lot of aborted babies, late term aborted babies, mutilated bodies. It's just heart-wrenching to see what they did to these bodies, and they were about to throw them in the incinerator, and they got these bodies. Well, they're coming after them in Washington D.C., but she decided that she would run in her home state. She would run for president so she could run some ads and show people what it was. Now, she describes herself as a progressive leftist Democrat, but that's her issue. Her issue is stopping abortion. So I probably wouldn't agree with her on anything else. But on abortion, she had the courage to run for office just so she could show what happens as part of an abortion. And of course, the Republicans aren't going to do that. That would really change minds. It's amazing to me how they're focused on not showing what a baby is, not showing what an abortion is. But if you were to just do what I played, I think it was Monday, there was a father in Brazil who his wife was pregnant. They were having a 4D ultrasound, which is ultrasound with movement. You can see what is happening with it. And as he's talking to the baby talk, you can see the baby smile. He stops talking, the baby stops smiling. He starts talking again, the baby's talking. It's a human being. And they need to, if they can't show that, but we don't have any hope of them defending this issue. And of course, we should not be passively sitting by and hoping that somebody's going to pick up the mantle and do what we know is right. That's for each and every one of us to get involved in that, and not to hope that somebody in Washington is going to do the right thing. They never do the right thing. If you go back and look at the history of this, do you remember in the late 90s or early 2000s? I think it was the late 90s. There was baby Samuel. And in Nashville, they had an operation that was being done. The baby had been identified as having spina bifida. And they thought they could ameliorate that by doing early surgery before the baby was born. And so there was this picture as the doctor was operating. The baby reached up with its tiny hand and grabbed his pinky. You ever see that picture, baby Samuel?
Yeah.
And so when I got a chance to meet Matt Drudge and talk to him before he became a Democrat or whatever is happening with the Drudge Report, but at the time he was doing conservative stuff. And so I talked to him and I said to him, thank you for putting that out there. And I know you took a lot of flack for that. And he actually got fired from Fox News. And he said, first he couldn't remember what I was talking about. And he said, oh, that. He said, I did that just so I could get out of my contract with Fox News. I knew they'd fire me.
Wow.
And so that's where Fox News is. That's where Roger Ailes was. That's where, of course, Rupert Murdoch is not a conservative by any means. I mean, he's just in it for the money. He just saw that there was a marketing opportunity to do a conservative news program. But the conservatives that he put in charge, people like Roger Ailes, they would fire Matt Drudge for showing a picture of a baby to show its humanity. And that's what those aborted pictures show, the humanity. That's what the ultrasound shows, the humanity. And they will not show that. They will shut that down everywhere. You try to show pictures of an aborted baby somewhere, boy, they'll come after you.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And now they're busy, you got all this new breed, the new Republicans, and you have these women in leadership, and they're busy like parading in bikinis on Twitter.
Oh, yeah, I know. Isn't that amazing?
Luna's one of them, Boebert's
Yeah.
another, and they're having all these discussions.
Laura Trump is showing herself working out and everything. It's like, so I'm supposed, it's all about identity. It's all about celebrity. It's like celebrity apprentices. That's what these people
Yep.
are. It's a high school student council election because there's nothing of any importance. And look, here's the thing. A lot of people, Joe Rogan, again, taking the flack, as you said, from the MAGA-tards because he's saying something like that. Well, he is, he had this epiphany when he was interviewing Quaid, who had just done the Reagan movie. And he said, who's running the country? Well, nobody's running the country that you can see. Nobody that you vote for is running the country. It's the bureaucracy. It's the military industrial complex. It's the CIA and the intelligence community. They're running the country, and they'll be running the country regardless of who's in office.
And what's fascinating about that, right, is like the allusion to Reagan, the movie. And so you had Ronald Reagan, who used to be a Democrat, who ran on Make America Great Again. And you had his vice president, who he had selected, Barry Goldwater, but who ends up being vice president. And I mean, we're watching the replay with this JD Vance thing, is like, regardless of who the head puppet in chief is, the control arm, the CIA, he needed to run with JD Vance, so that way the card is filled out. And it's the same, they run the same playbook. They don't even switch it up to try to fake people out. And we're not allowed to talk about the facts. We're not allowed to talk about reality. And it really has become this total social media frenzy where everybody acts like they're in high school on Facebook, and it's hard for a logical, rational person to even assimilate it or understand it, let alone to interact and talk about what platform you're running on, what are your ideals, what do you hold sacred, what are we keep talking about making America great again. Well, what made America great originally, and shouldn't we return to that rather than name calling and lock her up? And then you make all these talking points, and you're over the top about it, and then you don't even perform on any of this stuff. It's so surreal. And we're just trying to have a discussion. And
well, they made it about greed, and they made it about selfishness, haven't they? I mean, Ayn Rand got what she wanted. Just throw in some depravity and we got it all. But it's about greed. It's about selfishness. It's about narcissism. And that's the way it is for all of these people. And they're just a facade. They're just a facade for the unchanging permanent government that you didn't vote for. I said that in 2020. I said to people, I said, well, I'm voting for Trump. And they got real upset with me about that. And I said, wait a minute. You voted for Trump, and you say that it's not his fault this is happening. This is being done by other people. It's like, okay, well, it is the bureaucracy that's locked us down. It's the bureaucracy at many state and local levels, as well as the federal bureaucracy that's calling the shots. You're being ruled by people that you never voted for. We had this revolution. We were told that we were fighting against taxation without representation. Well, now we've got regulation without representation. These people are writing rules, and when they say if you violate one of their rules, you don't get due process. They can steal from you, civil asset forfeiture, they call it, saying you violated our rules. You didn't violate a law. If you violated a law that was passed by your elected representatives, Congress, well, then we would have to accuse you of something, give you due process, and then take your stuff. But since this is not a law, since this is a rule coming from me, then you have no due process. We can take your stuff, and you'll have to sue us, and you'll have to prove that you're innocent. There's no presumption of innocence. There's no protection against excessive fines. I mean, look at a few years ago when the FAA decided that they were going to start charging or forcing people to register drones. They said, if you don't register the drone, it's only going to be something like $8 or $10 or something to register your drone. But if you don't register your drone, then we find you flying one, it'll be a $25,000 fine or something like that. And they eventually pulled that back because of the outcry. But that was an excessive fine. It was excessive fines for what they were doing to people during COVID if they didn't wear the mask on the airplane or something like that. These are out of control bureaucracies, but that's the real government. Congress, even, it's not just the presidency, it's anybody in Washington. If the Congress holds show trials and they kick everything over to the bureaucracy. That's why when Nancy Pelosi said about Obamacare, we got to pass it so we can find out what's in it. She wasn't putting in the details of that. She was going to kick that over to the bureaucracy. They were going to write the rules, and then we're going to find out what's in it when we give it to them. All they do is they create a piece of legislation and hand it to an existing bureaucracy, or maybe they create a new bureaucracy. But it's the bureaucracies that are ruling us, and we don't get to vote for them. And so in Washington, it's important to watch what they're doing so that we know how they're going to come after us. But we have no more say over what's going on in Washington than we do over the UN or over Davos. I mean, who's going to replace Klaus Schwab? Do I get a vote for that? What difference would it make if I voted for Klaus or somebody as a replacement, whoever I voted for, right? We don't get a chance to have a say in any of this. It's just full-on tyranny from a faceless, nameless bureaucracy.
And as the technocracy moves forward, the people that are supposed to be representing us continue to shift the window, the Overton window, to the left. And then, like the RNC introduces somebody like Amber Rose. Are you familiar with Amber Rose? She spoke.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, here's an open Satanist and who talks all great about Satanism and how good it is. And then she's there on the platform, and well, she's kind of black and she has a tattoo on her forehead, and and you're just watching this like amalgamation and this merger. You got these rappers, keep your red hat on, and in God we what does it say? It says, I love God, but in Trump I trust. And it is such a brainwashing, and it's a way to just continue to shift that window to the left. And then when the people, I mean, my personal opinion is I see Trump clearly getting elected because of this whole assassination attempt, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that. I see that almost as a foregone conclusion. I could be wrong, since really nothing was done to fix our electoral process.
Well, it depends. It depends on if Lala can keep her Klingon cloaking device going long enough for people to not realize what she's about and what she wants to do. It's amazing to see just how shallow and vapid and arbitrary this whole process has become. And when people look at Trump and you talk about the Christian nationalism and things like that, this Reawaken tour that's going around, and you got all the usual MAGA grifters are on board. You got Michael Flynn, you got Roger Stone, Alex Jones, Charlie Kirk, all these people are there. And you got Michael Flynn literally plagiarizing a Elizabeth Clare prophet and a prayer that's straight, theosophy, and he plagiarized it word for word. I've played it on the show several times. Somebody put the two of them next to each other, that have her say a phrase and then he repeats it. And the sad thing is he's going into these big mega church buildings, and they've got all these MAGA people there, and they're bowing their heads and they're repeating after him these prayers to ascended masters. There's nothing Christian about it. It disgusts me to see the New Age Christianity of Michael Flynn and Alex Jones and how they're pushing this stuff out there. And these people are just falling in behind it. They have absolutely no idea what they or what they're praying to, who they're praying to, what is involved in all this. And it is a real fake Christianity that's been hijacked by these political grifters. They tried to hijack Jesus's name and doing this stuff in his name, and it is nothing at all, has nothing to do with Christianity. But these are people, the MAGA people don't really understand history. They don't understand politics. They just they know what they want, and they're very immature in the sense that they just want it to be true, and don't confuse them with any facts or history or anything else. They've never had any experience in this stuff. They're neophytes in it. They're self-identifying, many of them as Christians, but they don't know anything about Christianity or politics or the rest of it. And it truly is, if we want to transform our society, as you were saying before, the founders were against the establishment of religion, and yet, that's not it's not prohibited by the First Amendment, because you had a lot of state churches that were there, and then up to the 1840s, you still had in Massachusetts, and I think it was also in Connecticut, they had official state religion. So this was about making sure they didn't have an established federal religion that was going to overturn these other established state religions. But it's not a good thing. And they did know that it was not a good thing. We had Christianity thrived in America because it was divorced from politics. And if you mix those two things together, if you mix politics and religion, you're going to wind up with politics. It's going to completely swamp the religion. We understand that Christ's kingdom is not of this world, and the kingdom of God is within each and every one of us. And that's how you get a Christian society, one at a time. It's a work of God. We can try to help that along, but do what we can to encourage each other. But it is a work of God. It is a blessing of God, just like their freedom and their victory in the American Revolution they saw as a blessing from God. But we're not looking for that anymore. We're looking for what's going to give us a quick fix, and we're looking for a savior in Washington. And we are focused on what happens on this earth, not on the greater truth, and not on eternity. And we're not focused on Christ. We keep looking to Trump, and I'm so sick and tired of hearing all these MAGA people say, he's not an idol of mine. Oh, I put God above him, but right underneath him is Trump. No, he's an idol. We all talk about teen idols and movie star idols and all the rest of the stuff. It is an idol. When you're focused on that, I just wonder how much time these people spend thinking, meditating, reading, praying, versus watching Trump and getting on social media and flipping people off on social media. You know what? What is, just ask them to do some self introspection about that.
Well, what's fascinating, depending on what your eschatological position is, with Antichrist, it said Antichrist will come. And even now, are there many Antichrists? And we're watching all of these Antichrists are always very active in politics. And, that's why 10 years ago, we said, we want to live a simpler, a slower life. We want to observe the masses and do the opposite. And, I'm like, we're not going to be able to vote our way out of any of this stuff. So we have to take control of what we've been blessed with and what is in our purview, and focus on that, focus on our family, focus on our children, put them in a position to win with the vestiges of freedom that are still left. And, if you take all of that time and you focus it on the things that you do have influence over and that you can control, we understand that God is sovereign and God is in authority and control of everything. But if we take responsibility for what we can do, and if we love our neighbor and we control the things that we can control, it will be. And I think we're seeing this. I mean, it is regardless of whatever happens in the District of Criminals. It does the trajectory from a political standpoint does not change. The
all of these things I think should drive us towards Christ. You look at this and the hopelessness of it, right? It is truly, you're talking about being blackpilled, and people will say that. So I have to give people what the reality of what is happening. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, and it can be very black-pilled. It can be very dark, almost nihilistic if you just focus on that. But it should drive us to Christ. And that is the good thing. There isn't anything that anybody can do to get between me and Christ, or between you and Christ, right? There isn't any power on heaven or earth that can stop that. And that is such a foundation for us, that there isn't anything anywhere, physical, spiritual, political, you name it. There isn't any force or person that can get between us and Christ. And so let's drive further into that. And no matter how bad things get, we still have that. But at the same time, you have situations, you take a look at, when the Babylonian captivity, right? What does Jeremiah tell them? That passage that is so hopeful to everybody. I know the plans I have for you, to prosper, not to harm. And he says that in a context of judgment. Jeremiah
Yeah.
is talking about the horrible things that, it's all of this horrible stuff. And right there in the middle is like there's this one short passage that is like a rock under our feet. And he says, I know the plans I have for you. And he tells them, he says, you're in captivity. You're going to be in a foreign country for another 70 years. So pray for that country that you'll have peace. But then make sure that you raise your kids and that you get your kids married and you pass your values on to them and you build homes and you grow food and all the rest of this stuff. And I think that's what we need to look at, each and every one of us, and to rejoice in the freedom that we still have left. I mean, we look at a lot of dark clouds on the horizon, but the storm hasn't really gotten to us yet. We can see these things on the horizon coming, but we thank God that we still have this opportunity and this window, and that we've had a really blessed life in America so far. And, we can see bad things that are coming, but perhaps, prayer is always something that is the first thing that we should turn to, not to politics or the media. So,
And I believe that there's always a remnant, and I believe that God protects his remnant. It doesn't mean that we won't be affected by the fascism, the socialism, the communism. We'll be impacted by that. We'll be affected by that. Just ask the Christians that are currently living in China how all that works. But God is still faithful to provide for his people and for his remnant. And we can't, it's very good to be absolutely aware of what's going on around you and what they're trying to do and how they're systematically destroying our food and how they want to genetically modify us and poison us and do all these things. But at the same time, we have 6 children. My oldest still wants to get married and have more children and to do all the stuff that we're commanded to do, regardless of where we are currently. We're pilgrims passing through.
yeah.
And we look for a city whose builder and maker is God in the exact same way that Abraham did.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we've been commanded to be fruitful and multiply and plan for the future, plan for the worst, hope for the best, and continue forward. If there's any hope for society, I mean, come on, a president or whatever, whoever, the one thing that I always point out is like, look, this playbook, this isn't like an American, this isn't a national playbook. This is a global, international playbook. When Trump locked down America, all of the other leaders locked down the rest of the world. It was all done in lockstep.
That's right.
All the talking points were the same. All of these bureaucratic, technocratic, legislative bodies that influence, affect, and just force all this bureaucracy on us, they all did exactly the same thing. So it's not about like, oh, well, what you need to do is move to Russia because now Putin is this beacon of Orthodox, Greek Orthodox Christianity or whatever. Like, that's a setup too, like.
Oh, it is. And they, I should point out, they did it in lockstep and they did it iteratively, just like Fauci said. We're going to do it from the inside. We'll do it with disruption. And we'll do it iteratively. If it was an emergency, they weren't going to institute one thing and then, oh, by the way, 2 months from now, we'll do the next thing. No, you would do it all at once. You would open it up to everything. So we understood what that was about. It was pretty easy, really, to see through it, especially if you knew that they'd been practicing it for 20 years, every year, at least once. So I think, though, that people need to understand, first of all, there is no hope. There is no help coming from Washington. What is coming from Washington is the global agenda. It really is, in my opinion, the seat of Satan. It is where this stuff is hatched. All of these things, whether you're talking about artificial intelligence or DARPA, the internet, all these other things, they're all coming out of Washington. And what do we fund these institutions like the UN and all the rest of them as well. We're giving money to all of these institutions. The WHO, who's the biggest funder? We are. So if they don't have the will to do this, and if it's DARPA and the intelligence community, the CIA and others, who are hatching these plans and running these simulations and creating the technology and creating the drugs, maybe we has met the enemy and they is us. Because I really do think that it's coming from Washington. And so that's one of the things to me that I want to get people focused on. Don't focus on Washington. You're not going to change it. You got to block it. You got to nullify it. You got to do that from the bottom up. You got to do it from your local community, from your state. You may still be able to get something done at your state. You may still be able to get something done at your local community, but that's the only way that you're going to get anything done in politics. You need to understand where what their agenda is so that you can oppose it. But you're not going to be able to oppose it or have any effect voting in a federal election. Your vote isn't going to matter. It's not even honest. The ballot access is not honest. The counts are not honest. Everything about that election is rigged. But, when you look at a local election, you might be one vote out of 20,000 people. And that's going to make a much bigger difference. And you might be able to help the person who's running for office financially. And a little bit of money there would make a big difference, whereas a lot of money in Washington isn't going to make any difference. Elon Musk even talked about that. He said, why does George Soros, a billionaire, spend so much money on electing local district attorneys? Because he can have so much leverage at the local level. Even he can't get that kind of leverage in Washington. So I've been trying to tell people, look, if you want to vote for somebody, I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. I'm telling you, I'm not going to vote for any of these guys. And I'm not going to vote for Trump or for Lala or for RFK Jr. If I can find a protest vote for some third party, I might do that. But I'm going to be focused on the local elections. If I don't have anybody local that I want to vote for, like I didn't in Texas, I won't bother to vote this time. And but I said, focus on your local elections. Don't focus on what's happening with the federal guys, and don't look to them for any help, because you're only going to get the back of their hand. You really are.
Yeah, and when you think locally, the most local thing that you can have the greatest impact on is your family, right? Which is why we have to deal in reality and truth. And when we raise our children, we have to educate them on this illusion of politics. And, we have to deal with truth and reality. And if we start at our family and train them, and then we love our neighbor as ourselves, I mean, that's going to have the greatest impact. And then you have your family, and then you have your neighbor, and that starts to develop your community. Then your community reaches out regionally, and that's that grassroots bottom up, is starting at home.
Yes.
Raising a nuclear family, a husband and wife. And in a perfect world, the Lord has blessed us where my wife stays at home. We homeschool, she trains and rears our children. I make the money. I try to grease the skids and make the wheel go round. But we're focused on the most important things. I heard you mentioning, like, I think it's in the UK, where they're now sending like 25% of the kids they send to school aren't even potty trained. And this is just a litmus.
We don't have time for that. I gotta get to a job so I can pay for my taxes. Years ago, I was telling people, I said, look at the income tax, for example. I said in the 1950s, you had typically you had one person who was a breadwinner in the family, and usually the wife was staying at home. Divorce was still considered to be a bad thing. People tried to avoid it as much as possible. Now it's celebrated. But and at that time, you had the middle class family would pay about 2% of their income in taxes. And now, when I was talking about it, when I was running for office and stuff back in the early 90s, late 80s, I said, you look at what is happening now, the middle class family is paying about 25% of their income in taxes. And what does the working wife typically contribute? About that same amount. And when you look at the expense of a second person having to have a work wardrobe, and the cost of the car and commuting all the time and all the rest of the stuff, plus the time away from the family. So basically, you've taken the wife out of the home. You've told her how important it is to have a career, but it's not important to raise the kids. Because the government will do that for you. You can trust them to raise your kids for you. And so you put the wife to work, and they're no better off. As a matter of fact, we're far worse off, because you can't take a vacation anymore with one person working in most families. And it's very difficult to have the kind of lifestyle that we used to have in the 1950s with one wage earner. It's difficult to have that with two wage earners, but that's the temptation. And that's what they've sold to people. And so, as I was saying today, you look at the people who self-identify as Christians in the United States, has dropped from 90 and some in the 90s percentile. In the 1990s, it's dropped down to 63%. So they've lost 30 percentage points in 30 years. And what's the group that's leaving the most? Women are leaving the most because they have inculcated into them that it is important for them to be self-actualized and all the rest of this stuff, and they have to have a career. We used to understand that the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. And people would say that to honor motherhood, to honor the raising of children. That is still true, but the hand that is rocking the cradle now, the hand that's going to be changing the diapers, and because we're not doing the potty training even, is going to be the hand of government. And the Marxists have already taken over these institutions. And so it's a very dire situation if we're going to allow our kids to be raised by these institutions that have been taken over by the Marxists.
And
And
what's
we don't value
fascinating
mother.
about that, yeah, what's fascinating about that with the technology we have and everything, it's so much easier. It's not easy to stay at home and to keep the home and to train the kids. That is,
Right.
I don't want that job. I wasn't created or designed for that job. I don't I'm not going to kid myself or anybody else that I would even do that well. Obviously, I'd do it if I had to do it. But it's so, and that's, there's always silver linings to all these things, like with the lockdowns and the public school being forced to a laptop in the home. And many people woke up to the fact that, like, wow, one, this is just indoctrination. Two, these people don't do anything.
Mhm.
And and we can do this now, like,
Yeah,
and so, and that's what we try to encourage people, like, look, take control. You can take control of your child's education, educate your children.
that's right.
You don't need a master's degree, you don't need permission. In most states, you don't need permission. One of the reasons we moved to Texas is because we knew that we didn't need anyone's permission to train and educate our children. And for now, we're completely left alone, and our
Mhm.
children are thriving. That's another thing that we want to illustrate is, like, look, if you train your children and give them the resources that are available and encourage them to just do, go, try, learn in real time, like, it's so powerful, and these kids are excel exponentially versus any type of government school or government
Yeah.
propaganda or government system. And this is something that you can do.
Wasn't
And
it interesting to see what happened during the pandemic? Parents got a chance to see, as you pointed out, what was going on in the classroom. Because for years, I've talked to people. We were homeschooling in the '90s, and everybody say, "Well, you can't do that." And besides, the the schools are not that bad where my kid is. I can understand. I see what you're saying from the Department of Education. I can see what you're saying maybe from the state level, maybe even from the school district level, maybe even at the school where my kid is. But I know that my kids' teachers are great. Well, they could see what the kids' teachers were doing, and a lot of them saw that it wasn't so great. And as you point out, they could see that they could do it as well themselves. But the other thing that I thought was always interesting, everybody would say, but what about socialization? What about socialization? Yeah, what about socialization in 2020? You look at that kind of socialization, that was the kind of socialization that typically happens in schools on steroids. It was humiliation, it was domination. That kind of, you stay 6 feet apart from everybody. You put plastic around your desk or something, or you wear a mask all the time. That kind of humiliation and domination that was always a part of school. It was even a part of school when I was in school to extent. Everything has changed rapidly since then. But even when I was in school, there were elements of that domination, of that group think, of these arbitrary rules, and you just obey the person in authority. That's the Milgram experiment. And then you also have to navigate what's going on with all of your peers. That's the Ash experiment, where people will bow to peer pressure, people will bow to an authority figure. And I used to always tell people, it's like, yeah, I don't want my kids being socialized by some authoritarian teacher, perhaps. We don't know who these teachers, some good teachers, but there's a lot of bad teachers. I don't want them being socialized by a teacher that is dominating them. And I don't want them being socialized by a mob of kids. I mean, that's the Lord of the Flies.
Mhm.
And so, that has always been a problem, but they really put it on steroids and then completely thumbed their nose at socialization. And boy, that argument has just gone out the window. Nobody talks about that anymore. God has given us a silver lining in all this lockdown stuff. It's given people an opportunity to see the truth if they're willing to see the truth about the most important thing, and that's what's being done to our kids. And if they won't do anything about it now, they aren't going to ever do anything about it.
And what's just as important is, and we already know because they have been dry running this, we know that there is another lockdown coming. We don't know
Mhm.
when. Well, Tedros just said it. He just, well, he says it all the time. It's not if, it's when. And we know from uh, all the different tabletop experiments that it'll be worse the second time, and it'll be more strict and more severe and more regulation, and
Mhm.
lock down harder. And that's why it's that much more important to, like on a federal level. Like, look, if you have a federal job, if I had a federal job, I would be considering, what am I doing? What do I plan on doing in the future? You know, we
You
know
gotta
for
get out of that. You gotta get out of the big corporations as well because we know what they're going to do the next time. Any of these institutions, they're totally under control. Look, Lala Harris, as I pointed out today, you have to be vaccinated in order to work for her campaign. What do you think she's gonna do if she gets elected? They're all going to do that, though. And they're gonna do that through the corporations. That's a key part of it. It's that kind of plausible deniability that they want to maintain by running this through the corporations, by bribing people. But Biden is the kind of guy the Democrats are now. These tyrants are the kind of people who will just openly own it. And they'll just come out and start arbitrarily mandating and dictating things to people. But for the most part, it runs kind of in the background through this kind of bribery. And much of what Biden did with his mandates was telling corporations that had contracts with the government, you're going to lose that contract if you don't get your people vaccinated. They told the hospitals, we've been giving you a 20% bonus on everything if you just point to somebody and say they got COVID. And we gave you, that bonus, plus we gave you $9,000 or I'm sorry, $13,000. And if you identified them as COVID, plus a 20% bonus on everything. Plus, if you get them on a ventilator, where you're going to kill them, we'll give you $39,000. And so it was all incentivized. And they come back in and say, well, if you don't get all your people vaccinated, not only is all that money going to go away, but all your Medicare, Medicaid money is going to go away. You're going to go out of business if you don't get your people vaccinated. So it's that kind of gun to the head, which is a kind of coercion. He did actually mandate it with the military, but of course, Trump also had that order in place to mandate it for the military if he had been in office. And I said in December of 2020, I said, I'm telling you when this is going to roll out is going to be in September because it's going to be tied to the schools. And sure enough, in September 2021, they said, well, in August, we're going to authorize it next month, just in time for schools to start so they can start doing that to the kids. Yeah.
What do you have a take on this whole assassination attempt? As far as we know that the Secret Service, they cookie cuttered out this building so that they could just say that they're incompetent, and then you had all this local law enforcement that
Mhm.
somehow they were inept simultaneously in lockstep with the Secret Service. Do you have?
Yeah, I haven't really spent a lot of time on it. It's one of these things where, we go back to the Las Vegas shooting.
Mhm.
The Las Vegas shooting, there was a lot of suspicious stuff about that. And of course, you had a lot of people like, was it Jason Aldean? Not try that in a small town or whatever. He
Yep.
was wetting his pants and saying, "Well, we got to have gun control," because he was there and there were bullets were flying. And so, now he's beating his chest and, he's a supposedly pro gun guy or something now.
Mm.
But he was calling for that to happen. And of course, that was the basis for Trump saying, "Oh, we got to ban the bump stock." Everything about that was phony. Everything about it was funny. There's so many different things. And there's just like that, there's a lot of phony stuff about this Trump shooting from both sides. I mean, when you look at the unbelievable incompetence. It's such a level that you have to say, well, that's got to be intentional. And when you got incompetence piled on top of incompetence, perhaps there was a move to take it down passively and let something happen. Perhaps they organized this guy to go take a shot at him. Perhaps it was, as the left says, maybe it was a setup. Maybe, it was somebody on the Trump side that, maybe he pretended that he was shot in the ear, because I don't see any damage on his ear. I mean, do you? I actually saw videos of people saying, well, this is a miraculous miss. And they put up a dummy that had, that you would typically shoot. It had bone. You could see the bone structure, and it had a gel on it that was transparent, so you could see the skull and all the different bones. And they would shoot at this dummy, and so it took them a couple of times till they nicked the ear like that, and it tore it up. And I didn't see anything like that with Trump's ear. So I don't know what's going on. I could believe that it's anything and everything. My key thing is that, okay, so when are we going to have somebody say that I can't be locked down again? When is somebody going to start supporting the Constitution? When is somebody going to complain about the trillions of dollars? And the only time you get a complaint about the deficit is if they don't like the tax cut that's coming, or they don't like the candidate who's proposing the tax cut. You got Trump laughably saying, well, Lala Harris says she wants to cut tax. How's she going to pay for her economics program? It's like, how did you pay for your economics program? How did you pay for the PPP thing or the CARES Act? You didn't pay for any of it. You went into the deficit further than anybody had in history. And of course, Biden continued that and built upon that. And now we're $35 trillion in debt. Don't talk to me about that. You have Reason magazine. You have conservative think tanks. So you got the libertarians with Reason, and you got the conservative think tanks. And when anybody says, well, I want to cut taxes on people for tips, Reason comes out and starts sounding like Democrats from the 1970s, for example. Oh, well, that wouldn't be fair, because if you're going to cut the taxes for the waitress who's living, half of her income is on tips, and the person who's running the cashier, all of their income is non-tip. So they're going to be paying taxes on everything, whereas you're going to give her tax-free income on half of her income. That's not fair. Or they say, we can't afford this. It's going to kill the deficit. Are you kidding me? Where were these people? They're sounding like Bernie Sanders, who's whining about every tax cut. They're looting the treasury, or they're worried about fairness, and it's not fair. These people come out of the woodwork. People should be asking them, if you don't care about deficits, why are you even doing an income tax? And more importantly, when Trump wants to talk about his economics program, or any of the Republicans, have you heard any of them say we're going to stop this idea of growing the IRS to make it 7 times bigger? Right? Yep. When he passed this, their budget was $13 billion. They gave them $80 billion. They're going to make the IRS 7 times bigger than it is now. What's the purpose of that? But it's bipartisan. And when Mike Johnson got in, Kevin McCarthy was saying, well, I'm going to cut it back. I'm going to only make it 5 times bigger than it is. Well, then when Mike Johnson gets in, it's like, yeah, I'll sign off on everything that Biden wants. We'll make it 7 times as big. And so why are we growing the IRS to 7 times bigger than it is right now, when the only purpose of the income tax is to keep the middle class down? Its only purpose is to saw off the lower rungs of the ladder of success. It is to keep us poor, and it is to give tax breaks to them. And they don't care about the deficit. They've got the modern monetary theory, which says deficits don't matter. And of course, they don't matter to Trump or the GOP either. They might pay lip service to it occasionally, but it doesn't matter to them. So if the deficit doesn't matter, and if we've never come even close to paying for what the government is spending, even with an income tax, why are they keeping the income tax on? Because it's an instrument of control and economic control, and they're not going to give that up. And that's both of them. That's the Republicans and Democrats. That's why I said, you're not going to get any fixes out of Washington. You're going to have to cut them off somehow.
Yeah, and the biggest thing for me, I would see the most unifying thing that the left and right, as far as like general population, we could agree on, as far as like abolishing the Fed or abolishing personal income tax. That would be something that I think everybody could easily agree on, but it's just never talked about. And
Trump talked about the Fed. He said, I think as president, ought to have a say in what Fed policy is because I'm a better businessman than they are. No, you need to audit the Fed. You need to abolish the Fed. You need to abolish the income tax. These are things that Rand Paul was saying, not Rand Paul, Ron Paul was saying a long time ago. It was things that we were saying, again, when I was involved in third-party politics. We would talk about that in the late 80s, early 90s. And at that point in time, we'd say abolish income tax and abolish the IRS. And people look at it as like, come on, you guys are just nuts. Nobody, but you've got people who are saying that now, but they won't do it. Just like they say we want to get rid of the Department of Education, but they won't do that. That's been a promise from the Republicans from the moment it was created. Jimmy Carter created that during the 1980 election, and Ronald Reagan immediately said, I'm going to abolish that. But he didn't. Like I've said many times, he took Rosemary's Baby and he grew it into maturity. And none of them have shut down the Department of Education. They keep it going. Just had Thomas Massey introduced a bill to get rid of the Department of Education. And he said he had introduced it before as soon as Betsy DeVos he said her paperwork was sent over to Congress to authorize her for Trump. He wanted her to be the Department of Education head. And he said, and when they submitted her as the candidate for that, he said, I introduced the bill to get rid of the Department of Education. And he said it was a real awkward moment at a Christmas party. I got to meet her. And he said, Thomas Massey said, I said to her, I want to shut down your department. And he said, to my surprise, she quietly agreed, but she continued to run it anyway for the next 4 years. And he said, and now that she's out of office, she says she wants to get rid of it. Well, that's the way it always is, isn't it? Yeah. When you got somebody who's out of office, they're all about the Republicans. They're all about freedom. They're all about fiscal responsibility and all the rest of the stuff. But when they get in, they just want to feed it the trough.
Yeah.
That's all they want.
Yeah, and that's the siren song of Washington, D.C. I am kind of fascinated by Massey because from what I've read and seen, he is the absolutely most consistent
he is.
Representation in Washington, D.C., where the guy literally lives and dies on principle. And so that's kind of neat to see that.
I like him, but he's just one guy. It's like when Ron Paul was there. And, I would never want to live and work in that satanic cesspool. I don't know how he does it. He seems like a really decent guy. And it would just be beyond frustrating to be one of 500 people and the only one who really cares about anything. You'd never be able to get anything done. I'm glad that, he's there. I'm glad that Ron Paul would stand up and talk about that kind of stuff when he was there. But not even his son does that. Not even Rand Paul does that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been great, David. I appreciate you taking the time. Maybe for our listeners, if you could tell us where to find you.
Sure. Well, you can find us at thedavidknightshow.com. That'll have links to all the different places where you can find the show. We are on BitChute, we're on Rumble, we're on Odyssey, and we also have podcasts, and we have links to a lot of these podcasts because many times, the thing I've been fighting against is that they shadow ban me. Heavily shadow banned on social media, but again, you can find all those links. And so we put the show up every day. We do a 3-hour show live that goes from 9 to noon Eastern time. And so you can join live on several of these different platforms. We've got links about that. Or you can catch the show later at those places, or as a podcast, you can catch the audio for it. And we have links to all of those at thedavidknightshow.com. We're also on Roku, by the way. So you can watch us on a regular screen like that if you'd like to do that as well. So we have a lot of people who join the community that are there on a regular basis live. So there's a lot of different ways that you can catch the show. And every day, because it's such a long show and we cover so many different topics, we always put all of the topics that we cover by time code. And so we hit a particular topic and I'll list the different things we said about that topic and where that topic begins so that you can jump to the areas that you're interested in. So that's something that kind of helps to ameliorate the long 3-hour podcast. A lot of people listen to it if they're working or they're driving or something like that. But, if you want to just cut to the chase, we also will take out each day 2 or 3 cuts from the show and put them up on Odyssey or BitChute or Rumble, and so we put those short clips up there. But we have the full show indexed as to what the topics are and where they begin with the time code each day. TheDavidKnightShow.com.
I'll put a link down below. I really appreciate all the effort and the work that you and your family do. I appreciate your Christian values and your outspokenness about Christ and biblical principles. And it's really needed in today and age that we live in to just be able to navigate the clown show, this very weird, surreal, postmodern, post-truth world that we live in. If we can at least direct people to the truth, it'll hopefully get people to start to think and maybe break through this shifting Overton window and these paradigms, and we can start having discussions again, and we can start working together again. We have a local meetup. Our next meetup is the first Saturday of September. That's going to be at Bob Wells Nursery at Sorellas Farms in Mineola, Texas. So I just wanted to remind everybody of that. We've been a little bit out of pocket, and this is a value for value show. So if you appreciate the content that we give you, go on over to TheTexasBoys.com and check us out over there. You can support the show over there. David, thank you so much for your time, and we appreciate the work that you're doing. And Texas misses you, but it sounds like you're thriving in Tennessee. So
yeah, Texas is great outside of the cities. The cities are really bad, and and it's that story in every state. Here in Tennessee, you don't want to be around Nashville or Memphis, but outside of that area. And so that's an interesting phenomenon that is happening everywhere, and that's what makes it challenging to try to get anything done at a state level, but you can still do things at the local level. And I just want to tell people, when we look at it, we do have that hope. I want to tell people about, give them a confidence in Christ, because hope is not the way that we typically think about it. When the Bible says that, it says a confident expectation. And so we can confidently expect good things to come. Even if there is darkness on the horizon, we don't need to be afraid of that. And so I want to give people that confident expectation that there's something better that is out there, and you've got an opportunity to find that. And so that is the key takeaway from all these programs. When we talk about politics, that is not the end result. That's just one aspect of our life that we need to take a look at, but that's not the meaning of life. It really isn't.
Excellent. Well, I can't think of a better way to wrap up the program. Thanks so much. Thank you all for listening. And remember, y'all, stay fearless, my friends.